The steam engine's final, shuddering breath echoed across the wooden platform of Honey Creek, a town so small it was barely a scratch on the map of the Dakota Territory. Clara Whitmore stepped down from the passenger car, her gloved hand trembling against the worn railing, her legs weak from 3 days of travel. She clutched a worn carpet bag in one hand, the weight of it insignificant compared to the hope she carried in her chest, a hope pinned on a man named Edward Ashford, whose letters had promised her a home, a future, and a love she had only ever read about in novels. She smoothed the front of her gray traveling dress, a garment she had stitched by lantern light for weeks, desperate to look presentable for the man who had paid for her passage. Her eyes scanned the crowd of rough-hewn miners, shopkeepers, and dusty cowboys, searching for a face that matched the tintype photograph she had memorized, a man with a kind smile and a new suit. But as the minutes stretched into an hour, the crowd thinned, and the sun began its slow, merciless climb. Her hopeful gaze hardened into a mask of quiet panic. A young boy, no older than 12, shuffled towards her, kicking at the dust with the toe of his boot. In his hand, he held a folded piece of paper, smudged with dirt. "You Miss Whitmore?" he mumbled, not quite meeting her eyes. When she nodded, he thrust the letter into her hand and ran off, disappearing behind a saloon. With fingers that suddenly felt numb, she unfolded the paper, the cheap stationery feeling like ice against her skin, already knowing in her gut that the world she had imagined was crumbling to dust. The letter was brief, cruel in its efficiency. Edward wrote that he had reconsidered the arrangement, that a woman from back east was too fine for the hardships he now faced, and that he had found someone more suitable to his current station. He had enclosed $4 for her return fare, as if that could possibly compensate for the loss of her home, her reputation, and the last shred of her dignity. A choked sound escaped her throat, half a sob and half a bitter laugh at her own foolishness. Clara sank onto a wooden crate near the water trough, the rough wood biting into her thighs through her skirt. The $4 felt like lead in her pocket. She had no family to return to, no future waiting for her back east. She had burned every bridge to answer Edward's call. The prairie wind, hot and dry, whipped a strand of auburn hair across her face, and for the first time since she was a child, she allowed herself to feel utterly and completely alone, a discarded package on the edge of the wilderness. Across the dusty thoroughfare, a rider sat astride a bay mare, his hat pulled low to shield his eyes from the glare. Silas Turner had come into town for supplies, but his attention was no longer on the hardware store. He had watched the woman step off the train with a hopeful grace that seemed out of place in this hard land. He had seen the boy deliver the letter, and he had witnessed the precise moment the life drained from her posture, a wilting flower in the brutal sun. Something in his chest tightened. Silas was a man of few words, his life defined by the silence of the open range and the solitary work of ranching. He knew the look of abandonment. He had worn it himself as a boy, left at an orphanage door without so much as a note. He saw in her not a damsel in distress, but a soul standing at a precipice. He dismounted, tying his horse to the rail, his movements slow and deliberate, not wanting to startle her. He had no grand plan, only a quiet impulse he couldn't name. He approached her not from the front, but from the side, so as not to appear threatening. He stopped a few feet away, the spurs on his boots giving a soft jingle. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the noise of the town. Clara looked up, her eyes red-rimmed, her defenses immediately rising. She saw a tall man with a sun-bronzed face and eyes the color of a summer storm, his clothes worn but clean. He wasn't Edward, but he was here. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" he asked, his gaze not prying but observant. Clara's instinct was to lie, to maintain some semblance of the dignity she felt she had lost. But looking into his steady, quiet eyes, the lie died on her lips. "I was to be married," she said, her voice cracking. He sent a letter instead." She held up the crumpled paper, a physical manifestation of her shame. Silas looked at it, then back at her, his expression unchanging, offering neither pity nor judgment. He glanced towards the boarding house across the street. Mrs. Gable runs a clean place. She give you a fair rate for a night. Let you get your bearings. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. Before Clara could protest, he placed a few coins on the crate beside her. That'll cover a room and a hot meal. The train back east comes through again on Thursday. He tipped his hat and turned to leave. His simple act of kindness, a stunning contrast to Edward's cold rejection. "Wait," Clara called out, her voice stronger than she felt. Silas paused, looking back over his shoulder. She stood up, clutching her bag, the coins in her hand. "I cannot simply wait here for 4 days. A charity case on a stranger's kindness." Her pride, battered but not broken, flared. "I am a teacher. I can sew. I can cook. Is there any work to be had? I cannot go back." The last words were a whisper, a confession of a choice already made. Silas turned fully, studying her with a new respect. She was not looking for a savior. She was looking for a chance. He rubbed the back of his neck, a habit when he was thinking. His own homestead was a chaotic mess of half-finished repairs and meals eaten cold from a tin plate. He needed help, but his solitary nature warred with the memory of his own loneliness. "My place is a few hours' ride," he said slowly. "It's not much, but I could use a hand with the cooking, the mending." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. The proposal was practical, devoid of romance, a business arrangement. Yet it was an escape from the suffocating pity she felt closing in on her. "I would work for my keep," she stated, her chin lifting, "until I can find a teaching position or earn enough for my own passage elsewhere." She was defining her own terms, taking back the control Edward had stolen. Silas simply nodded once, a silent agreement. He fetched his horse and helped her mount, his hands respectful and sure. The ride to his homestead was long, the landscape shifting from the cluttered town to the vast rolling prairie. Clara clung to his back, the world reduced to the scent of leather, horse, and the clean smell of him. They didn't speak much, but the silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who understood that words were often cheap. When they finally crested a hill, she saw it. A small cabin of rough-hewn logs, a sturdy barn, and a corral with 2 other horses. It was modest, but it was solid. The first week was a delicate dance of 2 strangers learning to share a space. Clara threw herself into work, scrubbing years of dust from the cabin, transforming bland stews into flavorful meals with wild herbs she found, and mending his shirts with precise, even stitches. She spoke of her life back east, her students, the small library she had loved. Silas listened, a quiet presence, finding her voice a balm to his long, silent evenings. He found himself lingering at the table after meals, unwilling to break the spell of her company. A month passed. One afternoon, a fierce prairie thunderstorm rolled in, the sky turning an ominous green-black. Clara, who had a deep fear of violent weather from a childhood incident, began to shake as the first cracks of thunder split the sky. Silas found her in the corner of the cabin, her hands pressed over her ears. Without a word, he sat down beside her, not touching her, but placing his body between her and the window. He began to speak in a low, steady voice about the ranch, his plans for the new fence, the foal due in the spring. His voice became her anchor, his steady presence a fortress against the storm. And in that moment, her fear began to transform into something else entirely. That night, after the storm had passed, leaving the air clean and sharp, Clara sat mending by the fire while Silas whittled a piece of wood. She looked up from her stitching, her needle pausing. "Why did you help me?" she asked, the question she had been holding in her heart since the train station. Silas was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he looked up, his gaze meeting hers, and for the first time, she saw the vulnerability behind his stoic mask. "Because I know what it's like to be left behind," he said simply. The revelation hung in the air, a bridge built between their two solitary souls. From that moment, the careful distance they had maintained began to close. Their conversations grew deeper, their laughter more frequent. Clara found herself watching for him to return from the range, a warmth blooming in her chest at the sight of his figure on the horizon. Silas found himself buying small things in town. He didn't need a length of ribbon, a tin of tea, just to see the light in her eyes. It was a slow burn, a love built not on passion, but on profound understanding. One evening, as the setting sun painted the prairie in shades of golden rose, they stood side by side on the porch, looking out at the land they had both, in their own ways, come to call home. Silas turned to her, his hand lifting to gently brush a stray hair from her cheek. "Clara," he said, her name a prayer on his lips. "I didn't send for a bride. I never thought I deserved one. But you are the home I was always meant to find." There were no letters, no promises written on paper, only his heart, laid bare in the fading light. Clara looked up at him, the man who had found her not in a grand train station, but in the depths of her despair. The man who had offered her not pity, but respect. Not rescue, but a chance. "I stopped looking for a husband the day I stepped off that train," she whispered, her hand rising to cover his. "I was only looking for a life. I found one here, with you." As the first stars emerged in the twilight sky, Silas leaned down, his kiss a gentle, silent promise. The abandoned bride had not found the man in the letters, but she had found the man who would cherish her for a lifetime. A love story written not in ink but in the quiet, enduring soil of the frontier.